to the No Hair All Heart podcast. I'm your very bald host, Mookie Spitz. And the one with a full head of hair is Mr. Max Rips. Welcome aboard the podcast, Max.
Thank you, Mookie. Glad to be here. Very excited.
Max is 27. He is a millennial Zoomer cusp, Mill Zoomer, a Zoomelial. And I am eager to hear your perspective about life, the universe, and everything. Give us the big 42 in at least as many minutes, Max. Your name is a great place to start. Max Rips is about as great a name for a rock guitar player as I can imagine. And you play in a band, you are a park ranger, and we're eager to hear what you think about this crazy world that good old boomer cusps like me have put you into.
Well, thanks for having me, Mookie. Definitely glad to share my insight. I think it's good that we're having intergenerational dialogue. I like to learn from people older than me and younger than me, and I think, a lot of us get pigeonholed into our social media echo chamber or our, just kind of the views of the world that we are consumed by. So I think it's good to talk to different people and see different perspectives and try to make what we can of it.
Yeah, I've been reaching out to folks cross generationally, as it were, everybody from entrepreneurs and startup founders to folks exactly like yourself who are experiencing the world fresh and eager. And a theme I've been hearing over and over again is flexible. So staying agile, learning, being enthusiastic and eager. And it seems like you embrace many of these qualities. As I mentioned, you're a band enthusiast. Can we start there again? Kind of anchoring in your cool name,
Uh,
and tell us a little bit about your musical career and aspirations and influences.
yeah, definitely. So, I started playing guitar in elementary school, and by about sixth or seventh grade, I had made a band with some of my friends, and all throughout school, middle school, high school, I played a lot of gigs around New York City, where I grew up, and there was a good scene going on. There was a lot of kids who, made bands, and it was definitely like a sense of DIY pop music out there. There was a lot of kids who went to LaGuardia Performing Arts School who made bands that kind of started to blow up a little bit back then, and there was a lot of eagerness and excitement, I think. And then I went to college out in Oberlin, Ohio, and there was a big music scene too, a lot of house shows. There's a music school out there. I didn't go to the music school, but those kids were much more into classical music and jazz and opera, and there was a good kind of mix of different styles over there and a lot of music going on. So I was lucky enough to play in a band there and um, be able to tour around the Midwest and the Northeast and meet a lot of really cool people and um, get immersed in the scene. And then I graduated. I moved to Philadelphia. COVID hit, and I locked myself in the room. I was like, I'm gonna make my masterpiece. I'd played in bands since I was a kid, but I hadn't made music by myself, all by myself, like produced, written, edited, that whole thing. Okay.
So it sounds like Max that you grew up with music playing since elementary school. Music's been an organic part of your life. Being in New York City gave you ample opportunity and encouragement to really indulge yourself in the arts, specifically
hmm
music. You've been jamming the whole way through, and it sounds like you had a good pandemic, at least in terms of the isolation being an opportunity to really fulfill your dream of being writer, producer, sound engineer, and full scale maestro. Is that right?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a good pandemic because it forced me to reckon with the fact that I can't do it all alone, and I drove myself kind of crazy, to be honest. I I locked myself in my room for about 6 months working on this album, and I thought I had to do everything myself. And I did get some help from friends, and I eventually did ask for a couple friends to collaborate on it. But it really made me not enjoy music. I was working from home in a job I didn't like on my computer, and then I would get off and I'd force myself to make music on my computer, and I was stuck in my room, and everyone online told me we weren't allowed to have any friends, and I couldn't see anybody, and I wasn't allowed to take the train anywhere, and I wasn't supposed to go to anywhere, any store, or any gas. So I was just really focused, and eventually it made me kind of hate making music. I had to actually stop making music for almost a year after, and kind of reestablish my relationship. And even since then I feel like my relationship really changed with music. In the sense of I used to have this grind or this New York hustle of, seeing people I knew really succeed and really push themselves and really put out a lot of music, especially with Bandcamp and Spotify coming out around that time. Anybody could really put their music online. I mean, Spotify and the streaming service cost a little bit of money, but yeah, and so I thought I had to keep up with this pace, this unrealistic pace of making like 3 albums a year with like three different bands, and yeah, it really wore me out because I put out my album, Aves in 2020 in I think October, and I kind of was just so burned out making it that I couldn't promote it because I was just so tired of it and so bored of hearing the same song over and over again. And I'm proud of how it came out. I think it was a cool album. I think I did a lot of cool experimental sounds, and I'm happy with the product, but it wasn't the best experience. And I'll compare that to a lot of other times where I'm in a band and it's really fun and it's really feels like I'm just hanging out with my friends. And uh, when it's collaborative, there's a lot more leeway where you can kind of work together and say, oh, maybe this doesn't work, or oh, this sounds really good. And I think when you're collaborating, you can't control everything. I think that's my favorite thing about collaborating with music is when you're collaborating with somebody, they're going to do something and you have no control and you have to just accept it. And I think having too much control can be a curse when you're creating something because you feel like you have to put every single thought into like every single option and every single sound and everything has to be super thought out when a lot of music is done just best when you're just jamming and you're just not even thinking and you're all just kind of tuned in or locked in on the same wavelength, but you're not necessarily like, using 100% of your brain and stressing yourself out.
The triptych of music that we grew up with, which is sex and drugs and rock and roll. So music is interacting with people. It's community.
Mhm.
It's communal. It's a guy with a guitar and an axe to grind, literally and figuratively. So it sounds like you wanted to make your album, just like some people might want to write the great American novel. You were sequestered, so the time and space made sense. But what you had lost, it sounds like, is that spirit of rocking the free world with a free world.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
without that human connection, in a sense, what's the point, right?
Hmm.
It's great to
Hmm.
be a creator, but you need to create for somebody. And it also sounds like you like to create with others, and out of
Yeah.
that out of that collaboration and improvisation comes something unexpected. So to me, what this sounds like is predictability is the antithesis of rocking out. Where's
I think
where's the
so.
energy? Where's the
Yeah.
energy? Where's
And like you
where's
said,
the
it's an interpersonal thing, and when you're locked up for COVID and you can't play music for people, you can't play shows, and you're only playing it for, a couple friends on the internet. That's who you're doing it for. And so if you really focus on that, it can be great. Here's a song I made, I'm making my friend happy. But if you're trying to think, oh, well, I want to be, I want thousands of people to stream my stuff on Spotify and I want to that's a whole different game. That's a marketing game, and that's like burning yourself out making the music. It's going to be impossible to market it yourself. Like I feel like if I had the option, I would just like have a friend who does all my social media and does all my marketing, and that I would just focus on the music. And I think you're right, like thinking too much and really like feeling that pressure is yeah, it was kind of antithetical to why I started music in the first place. And so since then I've tried to definitely change my relationship with music and do it more with my
Well,
friends
there's a
and
relationship with technology though
true,
too, and
true.
this is extremely interesting, especially from a fuddy-duddy guy like me. Where if you were a band back in the day, you did a demo tape, and it would be on a cassette tape.
Hmm.
I don't. Do you even know what those things are?
Oh yeah, we use
And
them.
you.
We're obsessed with the cassette. It's a
Oh, are
plug-in you
you?
put on your it's a plug-in you put on your audio
Right.
and then it no, I'm kidding. But
Right,
yeah, no,
right,
I
right.
yeah.
So media was a physical object back in
Mhm.
the day. You would buy a vinyl record and you would
Mhm.
read the liner notes and there'd be cool art on it and you would hold it in your hand. And as a digital native, I think sometimes you might even take for granted this reality that these on-demand streaming two-way digital forms of communication have given you the freedom to become your own distributor, not only
Mhm.
your own content creator. And what I'm hearing from you is that introduces a host of opportunities, but also a bunch of challenges that we never faced, which is, get your tape to an agent, try to get signed,
Mhm.
or be silent, or just
Mhm.
play the local clubs.
Yeah. I
and
mean
and,
now
that, and
labels
now
won't sign
you
you.
could upload, yeah, now you could upload it to Spotify, and who knows what happens, right? it's
Yeah,
it's
but
it's
labels
it's
won't
crowded,
yeah.
but you could get your stuff out there.
Labels won't sign you if you don't have a certain amount of followers on Instagram or you don't have a certain amount of listeners on Spotify. So that's where it becomes an issue is because the labels still exist, and they still have like the power and the money to get you on, you know,
Right.
connected and but at the same time they don't want to do the media or what, the promotion anymore. They want you to already have an audience. Before they gave you the audience. You get on this, you send your demo tape in, they sign you and then they are bringing you to a big audience because they're distributing the record all over the country to college radio, whatever. But now they expect you to have the audience already, so all they're really doing is just taking advantage of it and trying to make money. So I think like
Yeah, but
the whole
isn't
paradigm
that
has
a
shifted.
democratization?
It is and it
Right, but isn't
isn't.
that a
It is and it.
democratization?
I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
good that like the
Yeah, go
labels
ahead.
have less power in the sense of like, you don't need to be signed to a label, but I also think it creates more of a responsibility on the artist to also be a marketer, to also be, you have to be doing everything as an artist. You can't just you're not it creates a lot of like other steps and a lot of it online people are like you need to market yourself, you need to market yourself, you need to market yourself. So my whole Instagram, my whole TikTok, whatever, becomes people just marketing themselves, other musicians. And I listen to these people and I'm like, this is trash, this is all trash, like this sucks. Like when people are coming and telling me to listen to their music, I hate it. When I'm finding music because my friends are showing it to me or somebody's playing it at a party or I hear it on the street or even in a store or whatever. Like, I think the whole thing has changed, and there's just so many people out there who are begging you, listen to my song, this is my song, and it creates. I think it goes back to what you said, where music is communal, and I think still like the best situations and the best, for me, like the best results come from like a real life experience and getting offline and real shows. Um, like playing shows again has been so awesome and I'm lucky now I play drums in a couple bands and everyone always needs a drummer. If I have any recommendation for anybody, any musician trying to uh get into the music scene or join bands, it's definitely learn drums because I've been asked to play in so many more bands playing drums and I didn't even really play drums to start, but I learned it and I really love it. And I've been able to play a lot of shows recently playing drums and that's a whole different perspective than singing and playing guitar. But playing these shows I'm like, oh, this is why I'm doing it. Like I'm doing it for the feel of the music and the live performance. And when you're just sitting on your computer, it is more like content creation, or it's kind of like, it can still be artistic and it can still be creative, but you're playing with the machine and you're recording and you might be recording some live stuff, but a lot of people I know who are great musicians, great producers, they do everything on MIDI and musical typing and drawing it up with effects, and they might not even be able to play a real instrument at all. Like, they can play a couple notes on the piano, but like a lot of amazing musicians now don't even play an instrument. So it is a democratization in sense of like the means of being able to produce music or being able to record music has opened up. And I think that's awesome because now you have every single 10-year-old in the country um, is like really good at using band labs and GarageBand, and they're basically their own audio engineer at 10 years old, and they can um, record hit songs. Like literal kids are recording songs now on their iPhones that are so catchy and so good that they'll go sometimes and get famous just from um, doing that alone. And so I think it's a lot of opportunity, but it's a lot more pressure because it feels like you have to do everything yourself. And there's a lot of people out there being like, I did it this way, look at me, and your social media will kind of be an echo chamber of whatever you're doing. So if you're doing a lot of music, I'm just going to see a lot of ads for bands, and I don't really like ads for other bands because to me, like if you're spending money on the ad, like it just feels like, oh, well, why didn't you spend that money like recording or like just like I don't know, I'm just jealous maybe that they have money to spend and I feel like it just doesn't I'm not the targeted audience maybe or um I just hate when bands spend money on ads. I
Well,
mean, it's
well,
one thing
what's
when they're
what's
huge.
what's your, what's your goal, Max? Because it sounds like today is answer D, which is all of the above. So if I could
Mhm.
frame it for a second, is once again the old school way of doing it was all analog and it was all physical.
Mhm.
Back in the day, System of a Down used to hold parties and
Mhm.
spread flyers throughout LA. And they
Mhm.
reached the point where they had an enormous fan base and no songs.
Mhm.
And
That's
and
cool.
and the guys in Van Halen played bar mitzvahs and sweet sixteens on suburban lawns, rolling up the amps and playing for a keg of beer
Yeah.
and yeah, and doing Gazaris and the clubs, and
Mhm.
it was all contingent on, Mo Austin having a free Tuesday rainy night and liking their version of You Really Got Me" by the Kinks, and that was it.
Mhm.
So you're
Mhm.
you're in you're in an environment of almost infinite choice and a tsunami of content. And there are real musicians. I go on Instagram and I see a 5-year-old playing like Randy Rhodes. And
Mhm.
then to your point, AI even is starting to take over the world where people are just pressing buttons. It's like
Mhm.
I used to think that the DJs felt that they were actually writing the songs that they spun back in the 90s in the club
Mhm.
scene. And now the whole definition of what it means to create music and to perform music and to distribute music is all upside down and it's literally all over the place. So
Mhm.
you're in this chaotic tumultuous swirl of infinite possibility and also infinite frustration. But so
Mhm.
my question to you, being this digital native in this amazing world of like, agony and ecstasy, what's your goal? So
Uh-huh.
do you want to crack it in the scene? Do you want to keep playing live? Do you want to, be like Moby and just kind of like spin when you feel like it and create when you feel like
Yeah.
it and just be cool? What
Yeah. I
is
mean,
your personal
that's a
aspiration
good
in all
that's
this?
a good question. I think it's somewhere in there in the middle. I think that yeah, like I mean maybe it's a bit like Luddite-ish or like but I think a lot of people in my generation like they feel very drawn to in-person connection now, especially after the pandemic and now being able to like go to shows and stuff. I think like the real like being part of my local scene. I have a record shop in my neighborhood. And what's really cool about the local scene in Philly is you have a lot of really successful, famous people who are very low key, and um, people might, know them all around the internet, but they're just real people in Philly, and I think that's why I was drawn to Philly in the first place. Is there's just so many artists here, and there's so much more, I think, accessibility of space in terms of like compared to New York, and there's just so many houses where people just throw shows in the basement. Like a lot of it's, college kids, but even grown adults still throw house shows in Philly. People in their 30s or whatever, and you have like 40, 50 year olds sometimes coming too. And I think in Philly, there's just a lot more of a DIY culture. I mean, people set up illegal raves in warehouses or in the park, and bands will throw shows at skate parks, and just that real actual aspect and being off of the internet and off of your phone. Because it's a vortex and it's so all encompassing that it's just like I feel so much healthier when I'm like not looking at my phone and when I'm interacting with the real world and meeting people and music wise too. I feel like the people who are most receptive are going to be the people in your community, your friends, the friends of your friends, other music appreciators, people who like this kind of sound. And another cool thing is like having friends in different scenes. So like back in the day, it might be like, oh, well, I'm a mod, I don't associate with the rockers, or I'm a punk and I hate, I hate disco or whatever, or I like disco. But now, because genre doesn't really exist in the same way anymore and everything's so melded together. Like I have like my good friend Henry who produced my last track, who I've worked with a lot. He's a electronic producer and he's played in bands for a long time, but he's gotten really into like 90s D&B and uh like a lot of those kind of more like subgenres. I'm blanking on the words now, but some of the like jungle and some of the grime and the UK stuff and trip hop and then he's got we've got some other friends that we've been working with who are like rappers and from Philly and then I have I play in a band that's more shoegaze where it's a lot of guitar pedals and reverb, and then I play in another band that's more of like a power pop band, um and we're all
That's fascinating. If I could just cut in there too.
uh-huh,
Once again, traditionally, you picked the lane and you were in it.
yeah.
So you were in a blues band. You were in R&B, classic
Hmm.
rock, prog rock. There were these subgenres, but it was a taxonomy that was very simple and it was very obvious, and within a measure everyone would know where you stood, what you played, and why you did what you did. And a consequence of this digital chaos that we've been talking about that you grew up in is the deletion of genre as their own categorical form of specific expression. So to your point, it's just like you're a drummer in all these different bands, it's becoming pretty much impossible to pinpoint what exactly the hell's going on in terms of these different stylistic choices. It seems to be a huge mashup of
Hmm.
of Beyonce doing country. You not only have these crossovers, but you've got this kind of meta postmodern musical experience where the genres are interchangeable.
Yep.
And I find that fascinating. It's confusing, but don't you think that it's ripe
I think
for
it's
for
beautiful.
guys like
Yeah.
you? Isn't it
It's
super cool?
awesome. I think
Yeah.
that's probably one of my favorite things about, the way that technology and society and music have developed. Um, yeah, I think it's super awesome. I think just me like growing up and listening on iTunes and listening to a lot of different kinds of music, I think most people my age didn't stick to one genre. And, we might have listened to classical rock as a kid, or, and then as we got older, we got into indie rock, or you start listening to hip hop, or you start listening to, the pop music on the charts. And now country's having a big moment. It's having a moment in the DIY scene. There's a lot of like kind of like alternative country, like hipster country, and there's just so much going on, like and I think it's really nice. Like I don't really believe in genre anymore, and it's hard to answer the question when people say, well, what kind of music do you make? It's like, well, sometimes I make UK grime or jungle, and sometimes I make pretty acoustic folk songs, or sometimes, I play in a hard rock band, like a punk band, and sometimes I play, more like kind of experimental stuff, and I've produced beats for hip hop artists, and worked with a lot of people in Philly, and I think what's great in Philly is there's so many different scenes coexisting. Like the West Philly scene is different than the Port Richmond scene, which is different than the South Philly scene, and it's different than what's going on uptown. And there's just so many different styles coexisting here that I think the crossover is just very natural and very organic. And my favorite shows are genre bending bills, or cross genre shows where you might have like a hip hop artist and uh a rock band, and then like an acoustic artist, or an experimental artist, or whatever, jazz, like classical. I think those are the most fun. Or like, yeah, usually you'll have like an acoustic act maybe opening up, maybe something softer, and then maybe you have a rock band, and then you have a rapper to finish, and it's like really like, wow, like you're getting a lot of different sounds. And to me that's so much more interesting than just hearing four really loud rock bands in a row, um or like
Yeah,
three quiet artists.
100%. So, the price that's paid for all this is chaos, disorientation, and really, really losing your bearings,
Hmm.
and just being overwhelmed with this tsunami of multifaceted content. But the
Hmm.
opportunity is epic in terms of diving into this frothy mix,
Yep.
doing whatever the hell you want, and pretty much never being bored because it's a dopamine overload of never-ending variability
Hmm.
and infinite content. So
Yep.
my next question is the one that it always falls back to any way you look at it, because the rent has to be paid
Hmm.
regardless of era, and that's like monetization and cracking through this mess and this opportunity.
Yeah. I just think you can't go into that with to be your first intention. And I know a lot of people who are like really focused on making money in music, and then they lose the joy of making the music, and or they become too stingy on their friends, or you get somebody, a band leader, who really wants to make money, and then they start, asking their bandmates to schlep all over the place but don't want to pay them. And then when the money comes, I think what's cool about music nowadays, and this is kind of related to what we were saying before, is like when people ask me, oh, have you been going to any shows recently? Or I don't really go to big shows. Like anybody on a major label, I don't really go to their shows because they're $100 and they're playing a big stadium and the sound sucks. But I go to a lot of these 10, $15 bills of like four random local acts that I've never heard before, or like playing with random artists I've never heard before, and then they're amazing, and like people are really nice. And I'm being able to like start throwing shows of myself and my friends groups, and meeting people, and actually book shows um over the course of the years. To me that's been the best money maker, because you might make like a couple hundred for a band a night, just for playing for 30 minutes, but it is a lot harder because you have to do all the work before, and practice and load all the equipment and all the communication and get all the people out, obviously. But I think what's cool is now it's a lot easier to get people to your shows because um you, even if it's a show where like you don't, like, a lot of times it's DM for a dress. I don't know. Have you heard of DM for a dress, Mookie?
No, educate me.
Okay, so a lot of shows now, especially when they're at people's houses in their basement, or say they're in a location where you don't actually have a park permit, or you don't have, it's not technically a show space, it's just somebody's property. So they won't put the address online, because if you put it online, it can get too many people, the word will get out, it'll get shut down. And what you actually do is you just DM them on Instagram, what's the address, and then they'll give you the address and you send it to your friends. Um,
Oh, so it's literally what it is, which is
yeah.
DM the address, which means you need to be in the know. If you
Yes.
know, if you know, you know. And it seems
Yes.
like it's guerrilla event planning.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. That's a
That
good
sounds
way.
fascinating, and it also illustrates that for every action there's a reaction. There's
Uh-huh.
a Newtonian physical law going on here, where where because of all these pressure points that we're talking about, everything from saturation to the big bands scrambling to monetize also, and tickets being in the hundreds, thousands of dollars for the major acts. There seems to be a fissure now between like this indie scene that you're very much a part of and the more mainstream top dollar scene,
Mm-hmm.
which is doing its own thing. And
Mm-hmm.
this again reinforces this multiplicity of norms, and it gives even more options to people. And if there's a will, there's a way, which is if you put pressure points on people, regardless whether it's a music scene or even a political scene or a cultural scene, then people find a way, especially if they're given tools as powerful as digital to create their own world and to just pave their own path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very astute, and I think you're right that there is different norms um in like the indie scene versus mainstream, and a lot of it's like if you do blow up too big, like if too many people say, I have a band that's somewhat successful in the local scene. We got a lot of friends, but it's just because we're working jobs and we're meeting people and we've lived in the city for a couple years. um we might be playing in a basement and 100 people show up and all of a sudden it's a fire hazard, and you know you're packed like sardines, and the neighbors start complaining, or people start getting unruly or whatever. And I think now, like you said, they kind of gatekeep it a little bit, where it's like if and it's like this is somebody's house too. They don't want it to be Project X and getting torn up and set on fire and smashing windows. We want, a polite, respectable show. Maybe 30, 40 people. That's all you need. That's a full room. And so I think there's definitely a different set of norms, and a lot of people in the indie scene kind of just want to stay there maybe, or like there's some people who really crave to be the next big thing, or be a star. And a lot of other people, though, I think to me what comes off as more genuine is the people who are just doing it to do it, and doing it for the love of the music. And I think a lot, and I think what you're talking about too, is very much illustrated in the difference between New York and Philly. In New York, it's a lot of bands who have a very like put together image. They have a Instagram with a couple thousand followers and with a nice photo shoot, and nice everything looks good and their outfits look good on stage, and they're playing like a specific type of music, and then you hear the music and you're like, it's okay. I mean, it's nothing, it doesn't blow my mind. But they really act, they're posting constantly and they're really doing the hustle, and sometimes these people will be really nice. But in Philly, I think the thing is more, and the thing I think there's a lot less DIY shows in New York City now, just because it's become so unaffordable, and the artists have been pushed out so far away. So it's like if you want to go out to East New York or the Bronx, like you probably find some DIY stuff. But in terms of like Manhattan or Lower East Side and Brooklyn, it's pretty hard. But there's a lot of venues in Bushwick. I played most of them um, when I was playing up in New York, and there's really cool venues, and there's a lot of you can have a lot of fun, and you can make some decent money filling when you fill some bars. But at the same time, I think in Philly the scene is much more DIY. It's much more house shows, basement shows, kind of like more off the beaten path stuff. And the music, I think, is a little bit more radical. It's a bit more um sometimes painful, sometimes harsh, sometimes pretty. I mean, in Philly, it feels like a lot of people just kind of like making music to make music, and making music from the heart or from the soul. In New York, it feels like a lot of people trying to like sell the product and get you to support their band, and get behind their big vision of like this image of an artist. Where I think in Philly, it's more of just like I'm just a musician, like I'm just a normal person who makes these interesting songs. And sometimes you'll have incredible performers, and then they get off stage and they just act like the most reserved, quiet people ever, and you're like, huh? Like, you were just up
So
there
so it
acting
sounds
crazy.
so, yeah, so it sounds like Moby and Max Rips have left the Big Apple to pursue more fertile pastures where it's more organic, it's more real, and it's
Yeah.
less. it's less unaffordable and therefore more businessy.
Yeah.
The corporate rock trajectory
Yeah.
is not for a true artist in the sense of the word, where you intrinsically enjoy what you're doing and want to do more of it without ostensibly this key performance indicator of making bank and being world famous.
Yeah, and I think people can make good money in their scene too. Like if you're just kind of like focused on your little niche and your little scene and um there's no need to like become this giant artist or like I mean I'm lucky enough to be exposed to like I had family friends who were in the pop music industry and were very successful and went on huge tours and are on top of the charts, but they were still, complaining that how expensive it was to put on these tours and how they have to pay a huge team and how much money and now they're doing well and but it was a long struggle and it was a lot of hard work and I think that yeah, for me, like that's the one of the main reasons I left New York in the first place when I did. And I'm really glad because it just feels like maybe it's, you have to leave the place you're from and see things from a different point of view. And I'm sure a lot of people from Philly are like, oh, Philly's trash, Philly, I hate Philly, blah blah blah. But there is a lot going on in Philly and I do feel like um the art scene is just so ripe and there's just so much coming from every single direction of every single style and there's so many different mediums of art out here too, whether it be visual or people making clothes, people making art out of rust and garbage materials. Like it's all over the map here. And I think like I don't know, the culture does feel similar in some ways to New York, and I think that's why I've been able to do well here. Being in the Northeast and the kind of grit and the grime is pretty similar. But yeah, I think like my goal is definitely to enjoy music. I mean, I'm also, I'm lucky enough to have a full-time job that pays the bills, so I'm not relying on music. But that was something I had to do. It wasn't like, it wasn't gonna be possible for me to just do music and not make any money because to my parents and to me, they never saw music as a way to make money. And they told me from a young age, "Oh, you're not going to make any money doing music." I mean, my dad's an artist; he's a photographer, and he's always kind of the classic, you know, like don't be an artist. Don't make the same mistakes I made. Get a real job. And so I'm lucky enough that I,
Which is a little surprising, because you'd figure someone dedicated to the arts would just
yeah,
ostensibly stick to their guns. But we do need to find balance, which is a perfect
hmm
segue to talking about the other aspect of your life, which is being this millennial Zoomer cusp, growing up in chaos, bubbles bursting, and our entire culture and politics really turning upside down in
hmm
ways that you don't even have perspective of, and then facing the reality of making ends meet. And leaving New York sounds like it was very productive for your creativity, gave you more
hmm
space and more opportunity, and seemed more genuine. Tell us a little bit about what it feels like to work, as a
hmm
20 something person in a world of such tremendous uncertainty and change,
I think
just
for
as far
me,
as
yeah.
making money goes.
Yeah, for me, I feel very grateful and very lucky. I started with the Philadelphia Parks and Rec in 2021 as a seasonal park ranger. And I love working for the city. I love Philadelphia Parks and Rec. I think we have an incredible space. Like we just have a lot of amazing parks in our city. But our budget was just so slashed and gutted that when I came to Parks and Rec, I feel like it was and it was during COVID too. It was kind of like a shell of what it could be, and so what's been really cool is to see things actually start to improve and to see um, like Parks and Rec just become more politically viable. And during COVID, everybody started realizing how much nature meant to them and how much um, like going outside, how important that was. And I don't know, I think like for me, working for the city provides a lot of stability. After 2 years as a seasonal, I was able to get promoted up to full time. So I'm a full time civil servant, which means that I have a pretty steady job. Um, and
Well,
in the
let me
past,
let me let me time out you for a second because
uh-huh.
there'll be a lot of civil servants, and at this point, ex civil servants who have been doged out of a job.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm tacitly assuming that you work for the state of Pennsylvania.
No, the city of Philadelphia.
Oh, so you actually work for the city. So
Yes.
you're a municipal employee.
Yes. And I'm so glad that worked out the way it did because like you said, yeah, the federal government now is all cracked out and they're, trying to fire every single person who is just trying to do their job and yeah, I'm lucky because even the state of Pennsylvania is run by a bunch of, rednecks and crooked, politicians who are just trying to steal money, I think. But luckily with the city, I mean, some people would say the same about the city, but to me, the city, it's much more local. Like, I've met multiple council members and politicians and like seen them actually like, interact with people and politics is all local. And I really think that like I'm proud to work for the city I live in. Um, we might not have the most resources, but like I feel like very thankful to like go to a job where I'm not generating profit really. I mean, now I am in some ways because I have to write parking tickets, but it's not expected of me. It's more of like, customer service, maintaining quality of life. And I'm not supposed to deal with criminal stuff either. That's what we have the police for. And um if it does get violent, like I know there's a very like strong and firm line where I'm not crossing and I'm not going to take this job into that territory. But it's it's hard because our we don't have a kind of infrastructure like a lot of other cities do, where you have informational rangers and enforcement rangers. We just have park rangers, and we only have about 12 or 15 at a given time in the whole city. So we're very understaffed, but we make do, and I think like seeing how hard people work for the city and you get a lot of overtime opportunities. So our and I'm part of a union. It's the big DC 33. It's the biggest union in the city. It's got like 30,000 municipal workers or something. So I don't know. I feel like very much a part of the community with the city, and I really feel like I have a family there. Like I feel like my workers or my coworkers treat me uh, like a member of their family and like a real person, and not just like a cog in the machine. And um, it feels a lot more real and genuine to me than a lot of other jobs I had coming out of college where I was working. I worked in the music industry. I actually worked for Universal Music Group as a temp doing customer service, and I saw how that worked. And I worked for also as a temp for Hamburg Sud, doing shipping containers, vessel processing, and that was intense. That was pretty mathematical and intense work. And I think in another situation, maybe I could have gone down that route, but yeah, I'm very thankful for ending up in the park and being able to work outside, work with my hands. I gotten really into plants and wildlife, and um, I'm so lucky because although I do work weekends, I work every single weekend. I'm paid to work at the Southeast Asian Market at FDR Park, which is where everybody goes for their weekends anyway. It's like people go here at their free time, and I'm paid to be here, and eat delicious food and smell the grills and the campfires and um, yeah, grow plants for free. I have all this access. Philadelphia has an amazing resource where they have free compost through the recycling center. So any resident can come and pick up like 5 gallons a week or something, or more than that, five-gallon buckets. So I've built a garden in my backyard. I never had a garden growing up or any outdoor space. So now I have a basement where I can play music. I think that's another thing about Philly that is very advantageous to music is a lot of these old row houses have basements and a lot of times they're unfinished and they're kind of gnarly, but um it's a space where you can have an amp and a couple of amps and a PA and a drum set and actually jam out because there's nobody really on top of you, and the old buildings hold the sound pretty well, and every
Yeah, yeah.
neighborhood's different.
Let's stick to just a second your
Yeah,
civil service because it's such fascinating counterpoint to the DC zeitgeist at the
yeah,
moment, and
yeah,
and you're making an impassioned, very personal expose, if you will, of the value of the civil servant in a civilized society, which is
Hmm.
ostensibly you're not generating revenue, but you're providing value. And I
Hmm.
think that really resonates. Michael Lewis, the writer and journalist, recently put out a book which was perfectly timed on really what government workers actually do and what they're actually like. And although
Hmm.
people might say that there's a tremendous amount of overspend and waste, at the core, people who pursue jobs just like the job that you've pursued and are doing provide society an immense amount of value, even if it doesn't translate into saving money or making money. It's not about that.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think with parks too, it's about mental health. And with COVID, we had an increase in violence, especially in Philadelphia. There was a ton of shooting. And like it's gotten better now, I think, in the years since, but a lot of it is like, people don't have safe access to like green space and like a space where they can just a third space where they can just chill out and not feel like they have to spend money. And I think that's like another really thing that Philadelphia is really great is that we have a really large encompassing park system. We have a ton of rec centers, and almost every single neighborhood basically has a rec center. So it's not always balanced. Like some neighborhoods have a lot more trees or a lot more parks, but I do think like there's more attention now paid to people's mental health, and um, so many people use our parks. Like hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people are using our parks every single day, and it's helping them. And if you don't have any parks and you just have concrete everywhere and people are going to be miserable and it's not gonna make the quality of life very good. So I think it's a balance, and it's hard in our capitalist society because people don't see value in or intrinsic value in something like a park. And you have to spend money to maintain a park. You have to make sure the trees aren't falling, on the people and branches. We have a lot of rainstorms, a lot of trees have fallen. You have to make sure the grass is cut. You have to make sure that, people throw litter. We have a lot of roads that run through our parks and people throw a ton of litter. So you have to make sure that gets taken care of. Um, all the programs, all the rec centers, everything it takes a lot of money. But when you look at the scope of the general city budget or the general US government budget, parks really only make up like no more than like five, maybe 10 or 15%, like at most, but like it's really not a big part of the general budget.
I,
And
I
like
would
you
I
said,
would I would guess that it's exponentially less than that.
yeah, I'm just thinking I guess the
Yeah,
federal government has a lot of
yeah.
parks, but it's tiny. Yeah, in Philadelphia, it's probably like yeah, like 2%, 1% of the budget. I mean, I'm pulling numbers out of my ass, but uh, yeah, it's hard, I think, to quantify that. And I'm very lucky to be in the system where I'm protected by a union and I know the scope of my job. And um, it doesn't pay the greatest, but I have a lot of opportunities for overtime. I just did the Schuylkill Regatta last week. I worked my first 18-hour shift. So that was something new. But it's a balance. You can't work yourself too hard. And I've seen people work themselves too hard because, there is so much to do, and people come in and they're like, oh my God, like I need to do this, I need to do that, like I need to save the park. Um, and you burn yourself out. So I think it's about finding like a solid pace and a balance. But the good thing for me is I don't hate my job, so it makes it a lot easier to get up in the morning, and um, yeah, it just it,
Well,
it
well,
makes it.
well. Speaking about balance and liking what you
Hmm.
do, let's go just a little bit macro because
Hmm.
I'd love to hear your feelings, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear your feelings about the overall vibe in the country. Only like 10, 12 years ago, where there really was a state change by any stretch, you were still in high school. So in only a few short years, America has really gone through a lot of intense change, and you probably just take it for granted because that's the world that you've grown up into. and it's been quite a whirlwind. I mean, social media has contributed to it. The digital explosion just feeds the fire, but we're increasingly polarized, and Americans aren't getting along. We've never really gotten along in these ways, but now the situation seems more and more acute, and it's harder to listen to folks, and if you're politically on a different side of the fence, then it's become almost impossible to even talk to people. So how does that impact your world, and what's your feeling in broader strokes as to the America that you grew up within and the America that you're living in, and where you think we
Hmm.
might be headed?
I mean, it's hard for me to say because I feel like what I know is New York and Philadelphia. I think America is so big and diverse that like so many parts of the country, like daily life is just so different for so many people, and we're such a segregated country, that I think like my experience is so different. In Philadelphia, we got a lot of old Trumpies, even in my neighborhood, but then we got like at the same time a lot of younger people who are much more radical, and there's a lot of nuance too, I think, in my generation. Like it always seems like left versus right, and but I think there's a lot more nuance. A lot of people might be much more leftist on some things, but then they're a little bit, more conservative, or they might be like sound super progressive, or like, I know people in my union who like Trump, but they're in a union, there's a lot of different,
Yeah,
or
it's
there's a
it's
lot of,
kind of it's kind of like the music scene almost. Like,
mm-hmm,
the genres where, you're either rock and roll or country, right? And
yeah,
now it's country rock. Now you've got these fissures and ripples and combinations of people where even in the last election, you had tons of minorities shifting to the GOP,
a lot
and
of
and
young
you've got,
men, yeah.
yeah, a lot of young men. So that's kind of fascinating, and where these worlds collide, where the destruction of musical genre is in a sense an analog to the destruction of our traditional two-party system, to the point where it's chaotic in music and it's chaotic in politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I think. And I think it's so hard. Like I can't even watch, MSNBC other than when it's on in the gym, because it's just like, or anything, CNN, Fox News, it's just endless, like, talking about the same three people over and over again. And I don't know. I just think like my real world experience is so, like, so not, well, I think it's like, I think that politics, national politics definitely affects our lived experience. But at the same time, I think that local politics and just like local dynamics and stuff like makes a big difference. And I just try not to get too wrapped up in it. And maybe it's because back in the day, local politics was like more civil and more respected, and politicians talked nice and they made people proud to be an American. Now, most people my age hate politicians. Most people I think in America just don't like politicians in general. I think that's across the aisle. A lot of people are just like very skeptical of these talking heads who just talk all day, but then they still watch them all day. And yeah, it's just for me, like, there's so many things I could focus on, and like, national politics just kind of bleeds in no matter what. And I feel like just being on the internet, like, you hear about things, but I just, yeah, to me, I almost, and maybe ignorance is bliss, and it's easier to just tune out at a certain point. Because I've just been used to this, for me, I was 4 years old when 9/11 happened, and I saw people get very, very Islamophobic and get like, very violent, and their country go to war and all that stuff. And then, I saw it swing the other way, and then it was Obama, and everyone was very progressive, um, and then we had Trump, and uh, I think most people haven't changed that much on an individual sense, but I think our collective consciousness is all over the place because we're such a chaotic country. um, we have like some places with enormous wealth, or we have certain classes of people who are, doing really well, or maybe they work in booming tech, in the tech industry, or in finance, or in private equity, and then you have a lot of working class positions that have completely shifted, where like your old working class was working at the factory, and now it's driving DoorDash and working for Amazon. And um, I think like being in New York, you can get very um, kind of isolated and surrounded by certain circles of people who are doing really well, or you know, you can kind of like get sucked into a certain type of narrative about the world, and then you go other places and everything is just completely different, or you drive, you know, 50 miles and everything is just completely different. And I think a lot of it too is like everyone thinks that they have to pull themselves up, and oh well, I can just be a streamer. I'm gonna make it by myself, and there's not enough emphasis on community in general. I think in America, I think America, like if our philosophy has any, like if there's anything I think that's like glaring about like the American society or like American culture, I think it's that like we have a very individualist society and we don't always value community. And I think that's our downfall, and that's why a lot of people feel isolated, honestly.
I think that's the underlying theme of everything that we've talked about, going all the way back to your COVID isolation, talking about moving from New York to Philly, the evolution of your career, its symbiosis with your musical pursuits, and that is connecting with people,
Hmm.
which is we have this digital explosion, this virtual reality of infinite possibility and endless expressions of different norms. And at the end of the day, people are people and they need to connect with each other in the real world, show empathy, listen, communicate. And as long as we anchor everything that we do in that emotional and personal and interpersonal reality, then the ghost in the machine is going to persist, and things will be okay. And I think that
Hmm.
that's a terrific takeaway, uh, not only for a boomer type, but for people who are entering this crazy world to believe in and practice.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard to be offline and in the real world, and I feel bad for all my friends who their jobs are just all online, or you know, I working from home at the beginning of the pandemic made me realize it's not for me. Like I need to be interacting with people in real life, and I think yeah, a lot of people now are just like they're online for work, they're online for socializing, they're on, you know, it's just especially with the pandemic, a lot of people I think are much more antisocial. They might have a couple friends, or you know, you might chat with some people or go out sometimes, but a lot of it's, you know, just meet, like a lot of it's just purely online based, and it's definitely difficult. I think like as somebody who feels like I have online fatigue, like I feel like to me, yeah, I'd rather just like the internet not even really exist. Like I just would rather kind of like raw dog it and see what would happen. Because I just feel so much more like in touch with myself, I think, mentally and physically, like when I'm not just on my phone the whole time. And there's good things about, you know, being in this era, and it's good to take advantage of it, but it's really hard to moderate yourself and to build limits and not just scroll on your phone for 15, 16 hours a day. Um, which I think a lot of people in my generation probably do. And I think that's also maybe why older generations think, oh, they don't want to work. They're just so lazy because they're just on their phone the whole time. And it's like, well, you might be making money on your phone. You might be, there's a lot of things you can be doing on your phone. Um, but at the same time, like eventually for some people it gets to be too much. Some people love their phone. Some people, you know, don't mind being online all the time. But for me at least, I think to find my balance and what works for me, I'd really have to log off and just get in
Yeah,
touch
yeah.
with real life.
Well, it's got benefits. One benefit is it gave us an opportunity to chat and for other
Yeah.
people to listen to our conversation. And if they'd like to continue the conversation, I'll share some links from you, your band camp, your music. It'd be great to have this opportunity to use this podcast to share some of your creativity
Oh, well, I
and and
appreciate it.
and
Thank
and,
you,
and
Mickey.
I and ideas. And thanks for joining me. And it would be great to maybe check back in 6 months or a year to see how things are evolved. And
Yeah.
and if you do crack it, then I knew you when. I
I'm
was
sure
I was the
everything I say will
first.
be the opposite.
Yes, I'll be. I was the first to get Max Rips on a podcast.
Well, I appreciate you for
Thanks
having me,
so much
Mookie.
for your insights. We really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And thanks for listening to the No Hair All Heart podcast. I'm your host, Mookie Spitz. Like, comment, and share. And there's a little link at the bottom of this description, too, where you could leave me or Max a personal note, and we'll do our best to get back to you. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you so much, Max Rips, for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you all for listening.